Welcome back, Camden Catholic and Honors. This is your second of two imperialism flips that we're getting into. And if you didn't notice, no, I'm not at school. I'm actually on vacation right now, really enjoying myself, trying to decompress a little bit, all right? So let's get after it. We're going to finish up your flip series now, though. Now remember, CP, you got to do these flips Tuesday night, part one. And this one that I'm recording now is Wednesday night's homework, all right? And then Honors, you're doing part one Thursday night, and then Friday night. Everyone's test is going to be on Wednesday of next week after Memorial Day, because all of you are going to have study guides by Friday, all right? You'll have an extra day to study. You'll be able to get after it. You'll be able to ask me questions on Tuesday, and we'll get into it. But let's finish it up, all right? I am probably hollering and waking some people up in this place, but it's okay, all right? Now, Europe in Africa. Wait a minute, Europe and Africa? That's right, Europe and Africa. All right, so here's the thing. The other big, so far we've discussed what imperialism is. We've talked about motivations behind it. We talked about the first entrance and opening of China, right? With the Opium Wars and the Brits and spheres of influence and all that other stuff. But now we're getting into probably the best example of imperialism, which is that of the Europeans in Africa, right? Africa was one of the first areas to fall subject to imperialism. Now, there's a word missing from this thing. It should say complete imperialism, all right? Africa, the entire continent, with the exception of two countries, which we'll get into here in a minute, which some of you should be very prideful about, because I know we have some first-generation Africans in our classes, right? So, because one of the, never mind, we'll get there, you'll see. All right, so, but complete imperialism is a key, all right? Now, of course, same motivations behind these things. Same motivations behind these things, right? We've got Europeans want to begin to explore the uncharted areas of Africa, all right? The interior to get the plentiful raw materials, right? The big raw materials that were going to be present in Africa include, but are not limited to, gold, diamonds, rubber, all right? Rubber plantations grew in the middle of Africa like it was going out of style. And given the time that actually is happening right now, it's turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, the automobile had just been invented. So the demand for rubber was huge for the tires, all right? Now here's the thing. Steamboats, Maxim guns, and medicine. Oh my! Those are the reasons why the Europeans had the ability to finally imperialize Africa. Do I have the thing about why that muskets stink? Do I have that in here? Nope. Wait. Nope. All right, cool. So, why had Europeans not gone in up to this point? Because muskets are terrible. And until the 1800s, the Maxim gun hadn't been invented. So, Africans were squaring off against Europeans primarily with bladed weapons, right? Now, an African with a spear is just as strong, if not more strong, with their tribal influences and groups than a European with a sword, all right? So, the thing about it also is there was a lot of disease. Jot this down. There was a lot of, know the whole thing about the Maxim gun. Maxim gun's first fully automatic weapon, right? There's actually an old rhyme that the people used to say in Great Britain, right? Because it was, whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not, all right? So the Maxim gun and fully automatic weapons are going to give the ability to, colonize Africa. It's really, really extreme. Steamboats was another big part of this, all right? Because there are wide river mouths in Africa, and the rivers are extremely navigable because they're actually not, subject to a lot of rapids and rocky structures. So a steamboat gave them the ability to not have to worry about horses and gave them the ability to travel into the interior of Africa much, much easier, right? Then you've also got medicine. So here's the thing. There are a bunch of diseases in Africa that could kill Europeans pre-1850, right? Yellow fever, malaria, sleeping disease. And then there was also another one that only affected horses, all right? So if your horse is dead, it doesn't carry the stuff you're trying to imperialize an entire continent with, right? So Europeans had little to no trouble after 1850. You need to know that this is all after 1850. Make sure you jot that down. It is very key, okay? They had little to no trouble acquiring any part of Africa, all right? There are multiple accounts of Europeans with only a few Maxim guns destroying entire tribes of African people, which is absolutely ridiculous and extremely messed up, right? Now, getting into it though, this is what Africa looked like before imperialism. Notice the only things you have are small exterior colonies. You got Cape Good Hope down here, which is the Dutch mostly, and the British. You've got some areas over here. You got the British up here as well in the north. You got French Algeria. This is what it looked like after 1850, or after 1885 anyway. So, as you can tell, there's going to be a scramble for colonies in Africa, all right? Write that down, the scramble for Africa. Or put scramble up here in quotations, right? Because the scramble for Africa was a very, very important trend in history, all right? So in 1884, a meeting was called the Berlin Conference, called by none other than your guy, Otto von Bismarck, right? To actually establish a meeting to split up the territory in Africa. No African officials were even invited, all right? And those territories were split up amongst the great powers of Europe, particularly Great Britain, the new German Empire, the French, and as well as, the Dutch, as well as some other B-rate players, the Belgians. Like, the Belgians conquered the middle of Africa under this guy named King Leopold II for its rubber plantations, right? The Belgians had been a country for 5 minutes, and they got invited to a thing to split up one of the oldest continents in the world. Belgium. All they've got's chocolate and I think that's it. All right. So anyway, now by 1904 though, and they put mayonnaise on their fries in Belgium. How gross is that? Now by 1904, almost the entire continent of Africa was owned by Europeans, with the exception of 2 countries. Jot these down. Ethiopia, which had actually bought real artillery and guns from the Europeans and used them against them. All right. So the Italians never had a chance of taking over Ethiopia. Right. The Ethiopia stayed liberated, and then Liberia, the country founded by former American slaves, was able to stay liberated because of the backing of the United States of America. So if we have any students who trace their heritage to Ethiopia or Liberia, you are one of the only 2 places that were able to stay immune to imperialism, which is a very, very interesting thing in history. Now, Africa is going to resist, often violently. Do not sit there and think that Africans rolled over and just allowed these things to happen. There were multiple violent resistances, right? However, they didn't have the technology to win. Maxim guns and automatic weapons, as well as these new medicines that gave these white Europeans the ability to go in and resist the effects of malaria, which is a big one, was this stuff called quinine medicine. Quinine, quinine. It's made out of a flower, and it moderates the effects of malaria, giving the ability for these people to actually come in. Europeans, particularly British people, would actually mix it into their drinks like gin and tonic. All right, and they would actually drink it all the time. So, but these Africans did resist this entire conquest. But as you can see, they just technologically didn't have a chance. All right, so as you can see, Liberia and Ethiopia remained completely immune. And then you've got the British, the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Belgians, and the Spanish are going to split up everything else, right? Man, that's insane. All right, so also notice that the Brits and the Spanish one is almost the exact same color. Just distinguish the fact that this is all British, okay? British, and then you got Spanish Morocco, Rio de Oro, which is in Mauritania, and a couple of other different areas as well. Now, then you're going to see an evolving of some different concepts, the big negatives of imperialism, right? Now, there were no real positives to imperialism in Africa. There were positives to imperialism in India, which we'll get to here in a second, but there were very few positives to imperialism in Africa, right? Many African nations are going to refuse. Now, this is going to make Europeans use force, and they're going to end up killing a lot of these natives. At one point, there was a tribe in South Africa that was resisting European rule, and it was 5,000 armed Africans versus 50 Brits and 4 Maxim guns, and the Africans were completely decimated. Over 1,000 people were killed in less than 30 minutes. All right, so this is absolutely unfair, and it's ridiculous. Now, land is going to also be taken from native tribes that had lived there for over 1,000 years. Actually, let's just go ahead and venture to say thousands of years. Religions and social structures are going to be decimated because the Europeans are going to view them as heathen and degraded. All right, so go ahead and jot those things down. Heathen and degraded, or barbaric, right? Paternalism and racism are also going to rise up from the imperialism period in Africa, right? Paternalism is this idea of viewing Africans as less than, almost like children that need guidance. It's paternal, right? And then also, speaking of the racist aspects, you're going to see a couple of different perspectives. You need to jot this stuff down. Like I said, don't mute this flip. This is very important. If you have me on closed captioning right now, this is an aggressive move. I think you should just unmute it and listen, all right? So, the white man's burden, okay? A phrase invented by a man named Rudyard Kipling, a Brit himself, who never actually was in the military but was always fascinated with it, right? So he was also obsessed with his son joining the military, particularly the Navy one day, but he never could do it because his eyesight was so jacked up. Not him, but his child. He actually spent a lot of his young life in India, where he was raised as a young man, to actually believe that Europeans, particularly British people, are bringing society to these third world countries, to the Indians, to the Africans. And so he invented a phrase known as the white man's burden, as in it is the burden of Europeans, the downfall of Europeans that have to spread their allegiance and technology to other heathen people, which is ridiculous and racist and messed up, right? So then also not to mention the fact that he also wrote a famous story, The Jungle Book. Yeah, that guy. Huge racist, Jungle Book. And don't get me wrong, The Jungle Book's a good movie, but like, dang, all right? He actually wrote The Jungle Book to romanticize the wilds of India because he was obsessed with them as a child. Now, anyway, then you also have social Darwinism. So Charles Darwin issued a lot of his big monumental theories in the late 1800s, right? You learned all about this in biology, all right? And I know you did because Miss Nguyen is awesome, and so is Miss Heck, all right? So Charles Darwin, Galapagos Islands, tortoises and finches, and he studies and publishes his findings in the evolution of species, right? So I think it's the evolution of species. What's the that's not the name of the book. Hold on, Charles. Origin of Species. See, Darwin, Origin of Species, right? Origin of Species. Yeah, sweet. Evolution of Species. Where he actually conjectured the ideas of evolution, that the strong will survive, right? So after this becomes widely accepted, a lot of people are going to take his ideas and apply them to things that don't make sense. Like society, for example. Eugenics is going to be a thing that pops up closer to World War II in the 1940s and 30s. But social Darwinism was an aspect used by imperialists to say that white Europeans were stronger, so they had to spread their influence, which is, again, not true, racist, and messed up, all right? So anyway, continuing forward. Now we've also got the other big one, the British in India, right? So the British in India, here's the thing. Some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry. We were talking about people being in India back with the spice trade. You're right. I hear you, Gabe. I hear you, Annie Magrino. You're right. You're right. Oh, also Emily Gallagher, Lindsay Bednarik. Just shout out to anybody else that I haven't said like your name before in a flip. Isaac. No, I've said Isaac before. Lindsay Bednarik and Emily Gallagher. I've said y'all now. You're welcome. So, 1600s. British East India Company is going to be created, right? And you're right, they had been there for a long time, but that doesn't mean that imperialism is not going to stay the same, right? So the British East India Company is going to be created. The Honorable British East India Company is going to be created in 1600, and they're going to go to India in the pursuit of spices and other goods, right? Now, the British are going to begin to settle into India and slowly work their way into society, as we talked about before, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to take advantage of India's fragmented culture, okay? So they have a lot of different regions of India, right? Northern India, which lends itself to being more Muslim. Southern India, which is Hindu. Eastern and northeastern India, which is highly Buddhist. There's a lot of fractures within India, right? So the big other question is why India, right? Not about the fact, like, we know that they took advantage of these different subcultures and they actually came in and, like, diplomatically and also by force took over the entire country. Also, write this down. It was called the crown jewel out of all of the other British, like, colonies, right? So, but why India? India, particularly early on because of the spice trade. But the second reason for why India in this new imperialism aspect in the 1800s is India also became a market for goods, as in these new industrial era, right? We're in post-industrial Europe now, where all these cheap fabrics and textiles are coming out of these new factories during the Industrial Revolution, and all these cheap goods are coming out of factories, period. India became a place to sell those goods, right? So these Europeans would actually make these things and then sell them to Indians. But also it was for agriculture. India became a place where you could grow things you couldn't grow in other areas, like opium for the Chinese, or cotton. Cotton was a big one that they grew in India as well, right? Cotton trade was also huge because North America, in particular the United States, was locking down the cotton trade and selling quite a bit of it. But Brits realized they could actually grow cotton very well in India, and that's where they got their supply, so they didn't have to buy it from America, right? So anyway, Britain's going to also take a soft-handed approach to India early on, using this thing called indirect rule. Underline indirect rule, star it, highlight it, circle it, write a sad face next to it because it makes us all upset. All right, now, Indirect rule is when you leave a local ruler in charge, right? Indirect rule was when they would actually hire or force Maharajas, Rajas, different provincial leaders to pledge their allegiance to Britain, right? Giving them a certain ruling power above them, all right? So, for example, just to give you an idea, there were less than 1,000 British rulers in India over a country of 300 million people, right? So just because the British weren't sitting there directly controlling them by hand every single day doesn't mean they didn't still own this colony, right? 2 out of every 3 soldiers that existed in British India were actually Indians themselves, right? Britain's motivations are going to change to military, a new market, and the grower of new raw materials. I actually just said all that stuff early on, but the military aspect is a really, really big one, all right? We're going to get to that here in a second. Now, here's the thing. Britain did try to do a couple of good things while they were there imperializing India, which is hard to even say because it doesn't feel like imperialism's ever okay, and it's really not. But there were some things going on in India that culturally were really messed up, right? And it's only 2 things, which if you look at the other things that are negative, they're greatly outweighed by. Now, the British wanted to use the Indian trade to make money, right? So if British are making money, then that means Indians are also making money in this new market economy, right? Many upper-class Indians are going to benefit from this trade. For example, a very, very wealthy business owner in India actually was the father of a very famous man that you've probably heard of before, Mahatma Gandhi, right? Mahatma Gandhi was only had access to education because his father made money off British trade, right? So the British also, if you don't know who Mahatma Gandhi is, you need to go look him up. Mahatma Gandhi is the man who actually liberated India from British control using pacifist movements like salt marches and hunger strikes, all right? Mahatma Gandhi, very interesting figure, right? Now, the British are also, they're going to go and try and destroy this thing called the caste system. Now, the caste system was a social class system that was extremely rigid in India, right? And it was based off their religion, all right? So in Hinduism, when you die, you are reincarnated, right? You actually don't go to another plane. You're reincarnated, okay? You come back as another thing, human, or other living being. Now, the caste system worked like this, though, okay? They believed they had one supreme god known as Brahman, right? And that every single caste was getting closer and closer to trying to become one with Brahman, or literally becoming a piece of God, right? So Brahmins were priests and teachers. Kshetras were actually warriors and rulers. Vaishyas were farmers, traders, etc., etc., etc. So the way this worked is, let's say hypothetically, let's use somebody as an example. Let's say Taylor McGee, all right? Taylor McGee was born as a Vaishya, right? Where he's a farmer, and he lives a heck of a good life, and he's a good person, and he does everything he's supposed to. So when he dies, he comes back as Christian Caminati, who is a Kshetra, a warrior, right? The same soul, though, okay? The same soul went into this new person, and they're moving up the classes, right? But let's say you were a bad person. You would actually move down the classes according to reincarnation. But the thing that's really unfair about this caste system is that you couldn't leave any of your caste. You were born into it. You would marry someone from your caste system. You would live in that caste. You would die in that caste. And some of the lower ones were really messed up. Like, for example, Shudras were laborers, which were in very poor areas and struggled really, really heavily. But then the worst of all of them were called Dalits, which are outcasts, which actually are street sweepers and toilet cleaners. They would have to actually clap when they came into the city because everybody thought they were going to spread disease, right? And you wouldn't talk to them. You didn't speak to them. They were not even allowed within city walls, right? And they were literally, this was backed by their religion. So that was super messed up. And the British are going to come in and destroy the caste system and say that no longer applies, right? Now, oh, by the way, Dalit means untouchable in the Hindi language, right? So they're also going to improve roads. They're also going to try and improve women's place in society. This right here is the practice of sati, that before the British actually came in, all women had to do that were married. If your husband died, ladies, and you were an Indian woman under the Hindu faith pre-British imperialism, if your husband died, you had to jump on his funeral pyre and kill yourself, which is awful, right? So they try to get rid of that. But the big bad things it's going to cause are revolts, okay? There are going to be massive revolts and a lot of loss of life in India due to the direct British imperialism, which, like I said, I believe outweighs the fact of anything positive. You're talking about death and torture. That's like a terrible thing. Sepoys were Indian soldiers, right? The Sepoy Mutiny is the most famous revolt, okay? So the Sepoy Mutiny was in the 1850s. I think it was 1858. Let me double check that really, really quick. Sepoy Mutiny was in 1857. Man, I bet it spread into 1858 still. The Sepoy Mutiny was actually, remember when I said only 1 out of every 3 soldiers in India were actually even British, right? So these Sepoys, those are those soldiers, right? And they were drafted and forced to serve absolutely anywhere. They actually served in World War I in Europe, right? They were called reservists. So the British could take these soldiers and force them to fight in wars that they weren't even related to. But the mutiny is going to break out, according to many historians, because of the bullet casings that sealed the muskets, right? Some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, didn't you just say they had Maxim guns? They did have Maxim guns, but do you think they're going to give Maxim guns to people that they are imperializing? No, because they're just going to turn them on you, right? So the Sepoy Mutiny was caused because they were given muskets, all right? So the musket packings were sealed up, though, with one very, very all-important material, cow fat. To open a musket pack, you got to put it in your mouth and tear it. Hindus believe that cows are sacred animals, and when they found out that cow fat was sealing these bullet casings, they had a revolt. They turned their weapons into clubs, and they beat many British soldiers to death. And then they also are going to try and spread and try and liberate as many Indian areas as they can. But due to this indirect rule, Indians and the Brits are going to destroy this revolt together, which is absolutely awful. They're also going to force Christian laws. Hindus are going to resist. Deforestation is going to be a major problem in India, where they're going to burn down forests to build factories and railroads. And population growth is going to go wildly out of control in India, which is going to cause some famine as well. All right? So as you can see, these bad things heavily outweigh anything positive. All right? Because women could refuse to practice sati. I mean, they'd be banished and outcasts and things like that. And being an untouchable is absolutely god-awful. But it's also a country full of people that have been living there for thousands of years. And so these things greatly outweigh those things. Imperialism is never good. It's never acceptable. And it's something that a lot of historians wish that we could just kind of get rid of. But it did happen, so we do have to talk about it, all right? But that's going to be it. That's your second flip of this series. Like I said, I hope you guys enjoy yourself. Relax this week. We're going to get into that test next week. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.